There is no denying that photography and filmmaking are two intertwined art forms, and today I want to cast a light literally and figuratively into two masters that, armed with the technical precision of engineers and the deep sensitivity of painters and musicians, casted major changes into the worlds of photography and filmmaking. We're talking about, of course, Gregg Toland and Orson Welles. So grab a drink, make yourself comfortable, and let's go straight to another video. Gregg Toland and Orson Welles shared more similarities than differences, despite the fact that their careers took very different turns. They both were perfectionists and extremely hard workers who had an insatiable thirst for knowledge and a liking for pushing boundaries. While Welles had a larger-than-life personality, working in theater and pulling nationwide stunts such as scaring half the nation into believing an alien invasion was about to take place, Toland was many of times the last person to leave the set as a young man, working for Fox Films. He wanted to learn and master the art of cinematography, and while he first stuck with the then norms of soft focus, shallow depth of field, and high-key lighting most Hollywood movies were known for back then, he quickly started to experiment when given the opportunity and freedom, of course, with the idea of having strong, deep blacks. And one of the most important aspects of Toland's cinematography would develop around this time with movies such as Les Miserables or Public Enemy, because he would push the boundaries of Hollywood's classic three-point lighting, key, fill, and backlight by having these lights pointed at surfaces rather than people. Toland's light is what I like to call it three-point surface lighting, where he points lights at walls, blinds, curtains, windows, whilst people are kept either in the dark or bouncing between the reflections and projections light created when in contact with these different surfaces, therefore adding more contrasts and beautiful tonal nuances to the scenes he filmed, which of course increases depth in the frame, one that is not only visual but also dramatic and narrative. So in a time where actors with their star persona qualities and characters were considered the most important element in the movies and the movie industry, this was for sure a way to push the envelope. Talking about pushing the envelope, when we look at an earlier movie by Orson Welles titled Too Much Johnson, which was actually considered lost until found in recent years, restored and put out for people, we can see an aptitude and liking of Welles, even in these early days, to use deep focus as a means to give information to the audience about what's happening on screen, how the characters are feeling, and to spatially situate us, the audience. This was highly unusual, but it was perhaps a sign of Welles' philosophy of looking within. Quote, "You should learn from your own interior vision and discover innocently, as though there had never been a D.W. Griffith, Eisenstein, Ford, Renoir, or anybody." And I believe Toland also followed this philosophy because all of us who live in society are inevitably influenced by our surroundings. I believe Toland and his use of shadows were also a product of the German expressionist influence from all the filmmakers who had migrated to Hollywood in the 1920s and 1930s, also the rise of hard-boiled literature and gangster movies. Nevertheless, there's another element that Toland introduced that us photographers, creatives, highly benefit from studying. That is angles. And looking back at filmmaking back in these days, we have to consider that most of the action was shot at eye level and also as horizontal as possible, in a sense that would allow the people watching, the audience, to have a better understanding of the story and better see the characters and what was going on. Now imagine Toland and Welles had all this trouble and all this care and consideration doing all these amazing movies, but then something happened to the footage. Either it was damaged or destroyed or lost at some point in time. Where back in the day it would have been more challenging for them to do something about it, but today they probably use the services of today's sponsor, Wondershares, Recover It. And in this new version of Recover It, we can now preview the data before recovery, recover our lost videos, photos, and even those in Ultra HD, 4K, and 8K formats from popular camera brands. But not only that, Recover It now supports the recovery of surveillance and car camera video. And Recover It has listened to its users' needs and also made space to recover a ton of new formats of raw scans. So I guess you can tell that Recover It will literally help you recovering it. I know, it's a bad joke, but still, links to Recover It are down below to their last, updated version as well. And you can find as well before you user notes and etc. The experience of other people that have shared, their tips as well, and how Recover It has helped them either in a more, in creative endeavor, or perhaps as well with data processing and other things related to their work or side hustle or whatever they were doing. So you're welcome to check it out down below, and I'd like to thank Recover It for kindly sponsoring today's video, for partnering with us here on the channel, and you for watching. So now, without further ado, let's go back to the video and see where Toland and Wells are at. Ceilings were pretty much non-existent in sets back then. But Toland disrupted this by introducing low angles, which associated with deep shadows that were being used almost as a strong compositional brush, if you will, dictates that Toland started using the available architecture as a means to explore the psychological aspects of the story being told by exploring light's reflection and diffusion, balancing this with the positioning of actors. Which, if we go back to Too Much Johnson, it's what Wells was doing by shooting from rooftops, pointing the camera up and down in chase scenes, although here we're talking about outdoor lighting and not really indoor. Nevertheless, looking at movies as early as Dark Angel, made in 1935, where Gregg Toland worked as a cinematographer, we understand yet another interesting characteristic of his photography: atmosphere. Toland was known for dedicating a lot of time and attention to emphasize the atmosphere in a scene, with special contributes being made to the emphasis of texture by using smoke, fog machines, haze, combining this with deep contrasts, different angles, and geometrical forms. It is known that in order to deepen his knowledge, he studied departments that weren't necessarily his own, for instance, that of hair and makeup. And he would take a lot of time on tests with actors to make sure certain effects were achievable. However, we need to put this all under context, a technological context, that is. Toland and Wells, at this moment in time, were working with a third, if not less, of the available technology we have today. The highest film speed available in film stocks of the time was around 32 or 40. Still, this didn't prevent Gregg Toland from actually shooting an entire scene with candlelight, and we can find this scene in the 1940s, particularly in a movie called The Grapes of Wrath. So since we've established how close Wells and Toland were in terms of wanting to push boundaries in pursuit of a more artistic filmmaking and photography, I think it's time to talk about one particular movie. The movie where both these men came together to create a complete masterpiece. 1941's Citizen Kane. However, I can't talk really about this movie without briefly mentioning some of the technical advancements that made it possible. For instance, split diopter lenses, which are lenses that are attached to an already existing camera lens so that it is able to feature at least two different focal planes. We also have the advancement of the dolly crane, which allowed for more fluid movements, the smaller Mitchell BNC camera, which could fit in smaller spaces and rooms, quieter and smaller lamps, newer film stocks like the Kodak Plus X and Super XX, which gave Toland the ability to shoot at a speed of 160, and lenses with coatings that eliminated internal reflection, that in turn kept flares down whilst allowing more light in, therefore allowing the crew to stop down to an f11 or f16 if needed and achieve more deeper focus. However, one extremely important thing needs to be said, that most of these effects, the contrasts and focus, movement, camera blocking, low angles, etc., were not mere stylistic choices. They were choices that helped in the narrative, meaning that these were decisions consciously made due to the perception of how they could help and improve the storytelling in the movie. So let us now look at some particular scenes in Citizen Kane so that we can learn, profound our knowledge and understanding, and perhaps take inspiration as photographers and creatives. When we look at this scene where the fate of the boy is being decided, we realize that everything is in focus, from the decision makers looking at the papers, discussing amongst each other, to the oblivious child seen through the window playing in the snow. This emphasizes in my eyes the idea of action consequence, and we the viewers are forced to see the decision makers and the one whose decision is going to affect within the same frame, and are confronted with his innocence, with the knowledge, intention and responsibility the other characters have and know of, which is much more powerful than simply cutting between shots, which would be something more classical in nature and more in line with what Hollywood was producing back then. Much later in the movie, we have deep focus being used to give the audience the dimension of what the character had accomplished. His larger-than-life personality, his sense of loss amongst all that he had collected, and in my opinion, it foretells the meaning of his character arc and how he had distanced himself from who he once was and from those around him. Still, in this film, we see the use of mirrors and glass as strong compositional tools, adding not only a visual depth to the frame, but also adding more and more information about things that could not be communicated through simple words. Last but not the least though, I wanted to come back to something I've talked before. I'd like to come back to angles, yet again. Much like Chaplin had done before in his movies and the German expressionist filmmakers, in Citizen Kane, Toland and Wells resorted to the technique of using muslin ceilings that allowed for audio to be recorded from above the ceilings and not directly above the actors, which made it possible for the adoption of different angles, which, associated with the newly produced and smaller light panels, made side lighting possible and very dominant throughout this movie, instead of having solely the traditional key lights placed above the characters. This of course created incredible visual contrasts on the characters and their faces, having not only a high dramatic effect, but also an informational purpose too, by accentuating a detail of the body or face of said character that clearly aided in the communication of their feelings or inner struggles in regards to others or the scenarios they found themselves in. For these and many other reasons you can find in books such as The Making of Citizen Kane, I consider this filmmaker, Orson Welles, and this cinematographer, Gregg Toland, as having had a profound impact in the business and art of making movies, creating images and capturing moments. Which is why I'd like to close this video with the wise words of Gregg Toland. You will accomplish much more by fitting your photography to the story instead of limiting the story to the narrow confines of the conventional photography practice. And as you do, so you'll learn that the camera is a flexible instrument with many of its possibilities still unexplored.